So my name's Arsal Rana. I'm the principal clinical psychologist at the early intervention service in Solihull. So I think initially Donna Haskane was the psychologist before me who since has left the service. She initially started the project with Steve Harrison, the team manager, and Jessica Lee, who's the assistant psychologist, who's also since left the team. So that's generally who started the project in its kind of early infancy, and then other people got involved throughout. So we had John Blick, who's our clinical nurse lead. And then we had one of our previous service users and their mum, who was their carer. So they were the kind of two EBs we kind of consulted throughout the project. As part of the early intervention service, we work with people with psychosis. So often as part of that, we create what we call kind of staying well plans. So plans or kind of a template that a service user can look at to kind of look at their early signs and look for signs of them potentially relapsing and strategies of what they can do to prevent that happening. So the project, how it came about, or what the rationale for essentially starting it was that we noticed many people within our service, even though we've got a relatively small caseload in comparison to like a community team, often had a comorbid, either official diagnosis of autism or suspected autism, and these staying well plans just weren't kind of fit for purpose for those kind of people struggling with different aspects of autism, whether it was the language being used or the kind of terminology, the structure of the staying well plan. So that got us started. That started us thinking as a team how we can make these plans a bit more kind of more adapted for them. And I suppose it's worth mentioning that in order to complete a staying well plan, we go through this process called, we use a process of early warning signs cards. So this kind of involves service users going through different symptoms of psychosis with a care coordinator and identifying which ones were relevant to them when they're either kind of in the early stages of relapsing or late stages. And again, this card sort process wasn't particularly adapted for autism, so that's kind of what we wanted to change to make the process more relevant. So I think in terms of how we use the model of improvement or kind of turn this into a QI project was initially we thought we'd just kind of start making some changes and get on with it. But then I think at the time many of the staff had started doing the different QI trainings, and we thought we could potentially turn this into something more formalized rather than just something we do in-house as a team. So we kind of started on the training, got a better understanding of how the QI projects work in terms of the identifying PDSA. So I think we'll talk about that a bit later, but the different kind of ways of formalizing, trying things, whether collecting outcome measures to see what was making a difference, coming up with brainstorming lots of different solutions to address the issues, kind of made us bring in experts by experience to get their takes on some of the changes we were making and how we had to think as well about how to evaluate those changes. So we had regular meetings once a week with the core kind of QI team. So that would usually be myself, Steve, and Jess as a minimum, and we'd bring in different people as and when needed to get their advice on some of the changes we were making. We'd also adapted some of our team processes in terms of regularly updating the team in business meetings about why we're doing what we're doing and what the rationale is and how the team can help. Collected a lot of data from the team in terms of their understanding of autism and any adaptations they make. So there was a lot of kind of exploratory kind of scoping work that we did initially to try and get a sense of how to kind of start this project in the right way. In terms of some of the PDSA cycles we used, there were a number of them throughout the project. I think one of the earlier ones was actually looking at the cards we had existing already that weren't adapted for autism, and this was in a meeting with the experts by experience we used throughout the project. And it was almost looking at the language we were using in them and coming up with ideas together about how to change it to make it more adaptive, whether it was the language on the cards, using examples pictorially on the back, changing the colors, changing the actual process. It was just going through different options of what we could change and the rationale for that, and coming up with these new cards and testing them. So the consultation process with the EBs was quite useful here, because the EB in question that we use, she had a diagnosis of autism, and she was really gave a lot of useful information about what she noticed, things we wouldn't necessarily be aware of. So coming up with the kind of wave of new changes for these cards was the first step. And then we kind of trialed that with a couple of our service users within the team, got some feedback from staff, the nurses who were using these cards in practice. I gave a presentation to the team about the project Autism, why we're making these changes, what the rationale is. So the staff kind of were more involved in the project. And I think in terms of going back to the PDSA cycle, we then kind of studied the feedback, what staff found, what the feedback was. Some found some of the cards a bit too repetitive or redundant. Then we made further changes, and we kind of just kept cycling and kind of tightening what the cards eventually did become in the end. I think some of the positives of the project were that it involved the whole team. Even though we worked kind of as a smaller QI project team, there was a lot of involvement from the wider team, which kind of got us talking more about autism and how it affects people. And again, working in early intervention, there's a lot of comorbidity around autism. I think when we did a scoping exercise, I think 44% of our caseload had either a confirmed or a suspected diagnosis. So even though this project was specifically looking at the early warning signs cards, just having an awareness about autism and how it affects people and the overlap it has between psychosis, delivering training to the team, having these cards adapted using kind of more autism friendly language, I think it overall educated the team a bit more. So we have kind of taken that learning forward when we're having discussions about new referrals or people we're struggling with in terms of clinically, in terms of what to do and how to support people. Autism's kind of on the agenda a bit more now. So I think that was kind of something we weren't expecting from the project, but it's kind of helped through looking at the early warning signs cards. So in terms of results that were interesting, we regularly gave questionnaires and surveys to the staff team in terms of their perceived kind of confidence in working with autism, their knowledge about how to adapt interventions for autism. So throughout the project, we were kind of evaluating staff levels of confidence, and that kind of positively was affected in a good way. So people felt more confident by the end of the project. I think in terms of the actual early warning signs, in terms of the actual staying well plans that we've now created, it's still early days in terms of actually utilising them with service users, but the few we have trialled, we've got some positive feedback about their usefulness. I mean, the experts by experience, we kind of consulted, said they wouldn't make any further changes to the cards, and they were discharged from our service a while back, but they recognised that if they had something like this to use, it would have been really beneficial for them. So I think just that linking in with them and getting their opinion, and also getting that re-establishing that contact with a previous service user and utilising their expertise and their kind of feeling like they're supporting the service that helped them, that was quite a nice part of the project. I think using EB's experts by experience with this project has been essential. So we had regular meetings as a staff team, and then it was pretty much every other meeting involved the experts by experience. And this went from just consultation, or actually them being willing for us to deliver the material to them, and they look at it, lots of handwritten annotated notes that they then gave back to us, really heavily involved, and it was so useful, some of the things we were getting. So I mean, we are trained in, so for myself as a psychologist, I'm aware of autism, and theoretically the staff are aware of what autism is. However, the actual lived experience can be quite different, and actually things that I didn't consider, or other staff members didn't consider, were raised by the service users, by the EBEs. So it has been really helpful to kind of have that collaborative working where we think we know what we're doing, and then we're getting this live feedback about actually this is really helpful and this is useful, and then we're using that with someone who's still under our service and they're kind of benefiting from it. So it was quite a nice cycle in that respect. So in terms of the next steps for the project, we've now finalised a set of what we call the adapted early warning signs cards, and those are that we've printed off and laminated copies for all of the CPN, the nurses within the team. So the next steps are for those cards to essentially be used, and they are kind of used at different times depending on people's journey within early intervention. However, from now on, whoever has a staying well plan developed will always be an adapted one with these newer cards. So next steps would be to kind of compare the effectiveness of these staying well plans in comparison to how they used to be perceived by service users, getting feedback from them formally or informally. We've already received positive feedback from the nurses who are actually doing the staying well plan process. Also on the back of them having training, having more of an understanding about how to make adaptations, even when practically doing the work. So not necessarily sitting head on with the service user, for example, or asking their preferences beforehand. Again, kind of going back to this idea that staff just feel more confident working with autism. So I think, to answer the question, next steps will be to kind of collect data on how these early warning signs cards and staying well plans are being utilised and how effective they are. We did this project as a QI project rather than just getting on with it in-house and kind of making changes ourselves. So some of the benefits of doing it this way is that we had a contact within the QI team, so Kuldeep, who would kind of keep us on focus really. He would email me often to check in on the project. It always felt like if I needed the support, it was there. At times where the motivation lapsed or certain staff members were on leave or we didn't have a meeting as regularly, having that kind of oversight of the QI team made us kind of, I say made, but kind of encouraged us to keep going with the project. And I think any barriers that were identified, thankfully we didn't have many, but there always seemed to be someone to talk to, or we need to get this consent, and then Kuldeep would know who to contact, and linking in with other people who are doing similar projects. So I think just having that framework around as a QI project help us kind of stay on target and do it in a bit more of a formal way. I think that was one of the benefits.